minor league football coach, and she was a loving wife. But behind closed doors, this Arkansas couple had a disturbing secret, and it only came to light when they were caught in an FBI sting targeting child sex predators. This couple drove almost 200 miles to meet up with who they thought were 4- and 9-year-old girls. Instead, they were arrested, and now they've been charged with a combined 30-year federal prison sentence. But that's not where the case ends. They face even more charges, and that could lead to an even longer sentence. This case takes us back to November of 2023. That's when the FBI and the Benton County Sheriff's Office joined forces. They were creating a task force, a sting operation to target child sex predators who were committing these crimes across the internet. Right away, investigators start speaking with someone who uses the username Central's Finest, and it becomes clear that this isn't just one person, it's actually a couple. So the couple behind the username is 30-year-old Benjamin Coney, who was actually a coach for the Arkansas Punishers. That's a minor league football team in Little Rock, and then his wife, 26-year-old Emily Brinley. Between November 19th and November 27th, this couple was speaking with an FBI agent, but they really thought they were talking to a mother who had 2 daughters, ages 9 and 4. And these conversations about child sexual assault are super disturbing. Here's straight from the charging docs, quote, "It appeared I was talking to a male, so I asked what about his wife. He responded that she likes them young and she wanted to see him F a prepubescent. Eventually things became more serious, and here's from the docs again, quote, Ben stated, I want you to feel as secure and safe as you can. She also really wants me to meet up and was wondering if we could come and play today. So eventually it was agreed upon that this couple is going to meet up with the mom and her 2 young daughters. So they drive from Conway, Arkansas all the way to Bentonville, Arkansas. It's a 3-hour drive. But when they get to this agreed upon location, there aren't any little girls. In fact, there are just FBI agents, and the couple is arrested. When they were taking a look through their vehicle, they found some pretty disturbing stuff too. Some lube, a receipt for that lube, and some other sexual items. Once the couple was in custody, they were separated and interviewed. During the course of the interview, Grace stated that she was just trying to be a good wife and that she was not interested in children. Grace said that she went along with Ben and repeated stuff she heard Ben say. Grace said that she was not going to do anything with any children and she just wanted to make him happy. When asked about the comment regarding trying to have a baby, Grace stated that Ben told her while having sex with her that he wanted to have a baby, and if it was a girl, he could have sex with her. Grace stated she started crying and then refused to have sex with him ever since then. Investigators spoke with Coney too, quote, during the course of the interview with Ben, he advised we would locate child sexual abuse material on his devices. Ben said he could talk a big game on the phone, but he did not think he would actually do anything in real life. By May of 2024, both Coney and Brinley were indicted by a federal grand jury. Right away, they faced charges of internet stalking of a minor and conspiracy to commit rape. But eventually, both Brinley and Coney reached a plea deal with prosecutors in July and September of last year. Ultimately, they were found guilty of online enticement of a minor. Now, these sentences were handed down just this month, and here's how they play out. Emily Grace Brinley was sentenced to 14 years in prison, with 15 years of supervised release to follow. Benjamin Coney was sentenced to 17 years, with an additional 25 years of supervised release after that. But the case still is not over. Each defendant still faces state charges. For Coney, that's charges of conspiracy to commit rape, internet stalking of a child, and 30 counts of distributing, possessing, or viewing child sex abuse material. And Brinley's charges are conspiracy to commit rape and internet stalking of a child. There's a lot happening in this case, so let's jump right to our interview with our expert. We've got yet another super disturbing case we're talking about today, and I want to take a deep dive because I still have some questions. So we're going to bring in criminal defense attorney and former domestic violence prosecutor Anthony Oso. And right from the start, Anthony, I wanted to ask you, I was going through and reading these court documents, and they're very descriptive and very disgusting about child sex acts. Very shocking to me, and I work in true crime. Is this something that comes up kind of a lot, unfortunately?
Unfortunately, Sierra, it's an all too common set of facts. In federal and state court, you're going to see see charges like this day in and day out. So this is not an uncommon situation, which I think is why they've got task force set up to combat these types of crimes.
And the task force really is what yielded in the conviction ultimately, because these people were talking online with someone they thought was a mom who had two young kids, but in reality, it was the FBI. So, can you explain that a bit to me, what those investigations or stings would look like?
Sure, Sierra. It's kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's a sting. These people will get on online chat rooms, various types of social media platforms, and engage in conversations with profiles that they think are underage kids or children. And in reality, it's just typically a federal agent or a state agent or police officer that's on the other end of the computer or phone or whatever platform they're using, posing as a child or somebody that's going to provide or facilitate a child for the purpose of engaging in sexual behavior.
That's got to be pretty nerve wracking because they definitely want to catch people who are going to go out and commit crimes. So, what is their ultimate goal? To have these people say that they're going to meet up somewhere or describe what they're going to do? What would they be looking for exactly?
Well, these investigations, when it comes to child predator type crimes, they come in different shapes and sizes, right? Um, I think the best form of evidence that you can have as an agent is if you have text messages with a perpetrator and then ultimately get them to meet you at an agreed upon point in time and location. That's kind of that's kind of the smoking gun. But other things that they can do is identify the IP address that the perpetrator is using to commit the crime, um, and then go from there to try and locate who that person might be on the other end of the conversation.
There was also talk of encrypted messages because the husband in this case, he at one point said something like, "You're not wearing a wire, are you?" He was like, "Are you an investigator?" kind of feeling out the waters. And then they switched to encrypted messages. So to me, that's something like Signal. But we still have the information from them. So why was he so keen on using this encrypted message service?
Well, I think exactly to his point, his concern is you're not wearing a wire on you. I mean, these people recognize that the behavior that they're engaging in can wind them up in serious trouble, like it did for Mr. Coney in this case. And the thing about these types of crimes is you're often dealing with rather sophisticated criminals. So they are on the dark web or they're on social media platforms or using messaging services where they're able to really cover up their tracks and prevent authorities from finding out their identity.
Now I'm starting to think consciousness of guilt. If he's saying, I want this to be on an encrypted site, and are you wearing a wire? I mean, could that be counted as consciousness of guilt?
Absolutely, but I think from what I've read in this case, the facts and the crime really spoke for itself. And this is really it's a statutory crime, so it's not even though he didn't actually meet with the child in this case, the definition of child under the law is somebody that the actor believed was under the legal age, so 18 in this case, and so um, the facts are already kind of met, and I'm sure with this kind of evidence that it probably resulted or it did result in a guilty plea rather quickly.
Yeah, this husband and wife really did spell out everything that they planned to do, and they believed that the kids they were going to meet up with were ages 4 and 9. Again, 4 and 9, single digits we're talking about here. And to your point, they never actually met up with any kids, but they described what they planned to do. So, does that show intent?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that you, but in a case like this, while intent is important, um, it's statutory. And so the minute that that they read those texts and they're asking them to engage in this type of behavior, and they can establish a belief that the child is actually or the person acting as a child is under the age of 18, the crime's already been met. But yes, any text about specific sexual acts or further engaging in how old the person on the other end of the conversation is, that's strong evidence for any prosecutor, and I'm sure that came into consideration during plea negotiations.
And they definitely did go into detail what they plan to do. Some of the info in the court docs, I'm not even going to put it in the story. It's so disturbing and disgusting. But on top of that, they didn't just say what they planned to do. They actually went to a location where they thought they were going to meet up with these kids. And I wanted to do some research about all of this. Like, was it a town over? In fact, it was 3 hours away, literally across the state. So they had so many chances to turn around and not do it, but they drove there anyway, which is just wild to me. And then when they get there, obviously they're arrested, and investigators find in their vehicle lube and some sexual items. I mean, that's really hard to combat, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think again, when you're the agent and you find those instruments in the car to commit the crime, um, it's sort of a turnkey case. So I don't think that I don't think this case really is about or was ever about an issue of guilt in a sense. I think it was always about, from a defense perspective of what redeeming qualities do Coney and his wife have to try and mitigate any form of punishment in this case. But clearly they were sentenced to a significant amount of time.
So they did end up taking a plea deal. So there wasn't any giant defense that was brought forward. But if there was, if defense attorneys were coming up with something, what would they even bring to the table? Maybe that this man was a football coach, so he was part of the community, but like that doesn't really make up for all of this. I don't know what would they say?
No, I think, Sierra, you'd have to go deeper than that. And if I was defending either of them in a case like this, you're going to want to look back to their childhood and look at what they endured during childhood, and probably have them visiting with a psychologist to find out, were they the victim of sexual abuse. Oftentimes, you will see that people that endure that in their childhood then later down the line actually commit the same type of crime. That might be something that you would bring to the judge. It doesn't excuse their actions, but it offers some sort of explanation as to how somebody um, could even be capable of committing that kind of crime, um, and really leaning into mental illness if it's present. I think those are the mitigating factors that you would want to bring forward to a judge.
As you said, we didn't end up seeing any of those because a plea deal was reached, and it seems like there was an overwhelming amount of evidence for federal prosecutors. And I wanted to talk to you about that too, because we have two ongoing things. It's federal and state at the same time. So they've been sentenced federally, but now they have state charges. How does all of that work?
Sure. Well, one important thing to keep in mind about a plea in federal court is there are many ways pleas work in federal court. They can cap the maximum punishment, or they can prosecutors can make a recommendation. But oftentimes, it's an open plea to the federal judge. So the judge has guidelines, a range at which they have to sentence a defendant to. So just because there was a plea doesn't mean it was a plea agreement like you see in state court oftentimes. Um, but to your other question about there being a corresponding state court case, the state court is not barred from bringing forth their own charges. You can be prosecuted for the same crime both federally and in state court, and it's not barred by double jeopardy or res judicata, um, because they're two different laws in two different jurisdictions. So you do see that from time to time.
Why would this have been brought originally in federal court too? I know that there's both. Is it because it was an online crime? I mean, everything happened within Arkansas. What makes it federal?
Well, anytime you're traveling and using the instrumentalities of our country, whether it's a roadway, um, or internet sources that connect people throughout the country, that would still be a violation of federal law, the enticing law. So that's probably how federal prosecutors got there. Um, and if it was a federal operation that resulted in um, this arrest, then I imagine those prosecutors would want to go forward. It's serious enough for the federal prosecutors to take the case on. And additionally, another thing, there's state when you receive time in federal prison, um, it's you don't get paroled out very quickly or as easily. So it's your sentence can be really lengthy and day for day.
That's a good point because they were speaking with an FBI agent, obviously a federal agent. So that checks out why it would have gone through the federal system in that way. They were sentenced to 17 and 14 years were the sentences, but now again, we have these state charges. So, how does that work? Would they be running concurrently, consecutively, or does it depend on the judge? How does all of that factor out?
It depends on the judge, and I imagine that they would run concurrent, considering that they pled guilty to the charges in federal court, and that might have been strategy on behalf of the defense. The defense is probably seeing this from a perspective of they're going to do time. And so it's just a matter of guiding them through the process and mitigating how much time they do. And so I think with a plea of guilty in federal court, it would be harder to turn around and have a trial in state court. So, because that guilty plea can be used in state court prosecutions. So I imagine that they'll work out a plea bargain agreement that probably will run concurrent.
What do you think about the sentences? 17 years for the husband, Coney, and 14 years for Brinley, the wife. Do those make sense to you?
Um, I would really have to review all of the facts in the case. I mean, I think based on it being an enticement charge, I don't think you can put a number on. I mean, I can't say what's right and wrong without really looking at the facts. I think some of the mitigating facts in this case are that no child was actually harmed. It's a heinous crime, and so um, 17 years is a long time. Um, but I think that hopefully that is a rehabilitative period for these defendants because and one thing to keep in mind too is once they're out, they have supervised release for I think 25 years for the husband and 15 years for the wife. So um, I can't say unless I see the file, but I do think 15 and 17 years is a long time. But I do think it fits the crime.
You brought up something super important too, that this is in fact a heinous crime. It's disturbing and disgusting, but no children were harmed in all of this. So that's the shining light in all of this, is that no one was harmed. However, other children have faced similar things. And I have to just kind of go back to at the start of the interview. Is this more prevalent than we think it is?
I think so. I think that the increasing use of technology has all I think it has allowed sexual offenders to communicate with other sexual offenders and share um, these types of photographs and communicate with children and get into contact with children a lot easier. The other side of that coin is that it's allowed investigators to better investigate these types of cases. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but I think technology has contributed to the problem more than it has probably solved it.
Pros and cons, both sides for all of that, and a tricky case to talk about. But thank you, Anthony, also coming on for us and chatting today.
Good to see you, Sierra.
So the federal case seems to be pretty wrapped up, but it's the state case that still has legal proceedings ahead. Coney is actually due back in court later this month, and Brinley, his wife, will appear back in court just next month. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.